Thank you, Dr. Chan, or Long, if I may. And
Yes, please.
thank you, Lidong, for impaneling us. We have a terrific group of speakers today, and I'm just going to try to motivate why I believe the tokenization of finance is a movement that will continue uh, after certain impediments have been overcome. But it's the future of financial markets, as I will explain. So I'm going to use a few slides to do that. I'm going to draw near the end on some new work on smart contracting in financial markets with Professor Wang Chaojuan at the University of Pennsylvania. So first, everyone knows that stablecoins are a phenomenon, particularly in the markets for cryptocurrencies. This is a projection by Citibank of the growth of the amount of stablecoins outstanding by the year 2030. If you look on the horizontal axis, there are three scenarios, A, B, and C, meaning modest, moderate, and optimistic. I'm going to I'm going to provide a hint of skepticism about the growth of stablecoins as a substitute for U.S. deposits in the U.S. domestic economy, and in particular in the both in the retail and in the wholesale financial applications. And I'm going to explain why. Part of that is my skepticism about whether, for retail purposes, Americans are likely to actually switch from their use of credit cards and other legacy payment systems to stablecoins until stablecoins have a killer application, which currently doesn't exist in the domestic retail economy. And partly over my concerns about whether stablecoins are suitable for wholesale financial markets. I am optimistic that there will be growth in the international use of stablecoins, US dollar stablecoins in particular, as a substitute for cash in the international setting. But that's not my topic for today. So let me proceed and try to explain my sense of skepticism about the use of stablecoins per se in finance, but talk about the tremendous promise of tokenization of finance. So here's an example, which is actually quite realistic. A US bank will pay $500 million for 400 million euros with an EU bank. Once the trade is agreed, the US bank will be hesitant to simply send $500 million dollars to Europe, not knowing whether or not it's going to receive the 400 million euros. This famous example is the failure of Herstatt Bank in 1973, when in the middle of the day, the German bank failed. It actually went bankrupt in the middle of the day, and the US bank, in this case, it was Citibank, and on behalf of its customers, lost $600 million dollars in that example. Since then, there has been a development of financial market infrastructure called CLS Bank, or Continuous Link Settlement Bank, that stands as a go-between. You can think of it as a virtual island in the middle of the Atlantic that holds the $500 million dollars coming from New York and waits and doesn't send it to Europe until it receives the 400 million euros coming from Frankfurt. And then once CLS Bank has received both payments, it passes on the dollars to Europe and the euros to New York. This is legacy. This is now legacy market infrastructure. It has costs, and it also doesn't cover a large fraction of global bilateral wholesale foreign exchange payments. Because of that, there's been experimentation with new methods for handling cross-border payments. Project Jura between the Swiss National Bank and the Banque de France, Project Cedar between the New York Fed and the Monetary Authority of Singapore are merely two examples. And later I will discuss Project Agora, which promises to put cross-border transactions, foreign exchange on blockchain or on some form of programmable ledger. Let me explain how this is going to work with a programmable ledger. So here we have the state of the ledger xt at time t, which represents all the positions held by all of the market participants that have access to the ledger, and all of the existing smart contracts that arrange for the exchange of one asset for another on this programmable ledger. This at time t plus one, the U.S. bank will send a cryptographically uh, signed message to the ledger committing some $500 million of its holdings of US dollars on the ledger, committing those funds to the European bank irrevocably, provided the European bank will do likewise within a stipulated amount of time with its euros. And you can see that in this outcome illustrated on the diagram, the EU bank indeed cryptographically commits 400 million euros from its wallet on the same programmable ledger to the US bank. The smart contract will recognize that both parties have met their payment obligations, and then it will release the dollars to the European bank and release the euros to the US bank. By so doing, both banks are free of gross settlement risk, and they don't need a trusted third party and all of the costs associated with that infrastructure. They can also do trade reconciliation by observing what's happening on the ledger. I see Kelly Matheson is here today. She may be speaking about this later today. Canton is the programmable ledger that has all of these capabilities. They can keep this information private or release it to exactly whomever they wish. These transactions can be conformable with other forms of transaction on a programmable ledger. So what's not to like? Well, let me explain in the next few minutes what's not to like about the current state of affairs in this setting. So here's another example. In fact, it is on Canton. When last August, there was an actual live exchange of US Treasuries for a stablecoin known as USDC that's issued by Circle. This was done through the cooperation of the Depository Trust Corporation, which allowed treasuries that were held in a conventional ledger to be tokenized onto the Canton ledger. And with that, the dealer's or seller's position in those treasuries was able to be exchanged with the buyer's cash in the form of USDC using the same kind of uh, atomic settlement that I just explained on a programmable ledger. Again, in this case, it was Canton. So this is a major innovation, and the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation has now received permission from the Securities and Exchange Commission in the US to tokenize US Treasury securities, 1,000 different equities, and potentially in the future, essentially all securities that are held on DTCC, which amounts to about 1 trillion, 100 trillion of securities, which means that the tokenization of finance can proceed, perhaps once we solve the problem of what kind of cash should be used. And let me explain this problem. The use of USDC in this setting, well, first, before I do that, let me show you how this is done on a abstract programmable ledger. So the timeline is along the horizontal axis at the bottom. At time T1, you can see the positions of investors A and B in their wallets of bonds and cash. Investor A will sell bonds to investor B. So at time T2, investor A moves some of the bonds from its securities wallet into a smart contract, irrevocably committing those bonds. Then at time T3, investor B moves some of its cash into the smart contract, irrevocably committing that cash. At time T4, the smart contract recognizes, this is just software, that both investors have met the terms of their agreement and releases the cash to investor A and the bonds to investor B. So then they now have control over those assets. They can move them off chain if they want to, where they can continue to trade on this programmable ledger with the same assets. I think everybody has the idea in mind. If by time T5, one of the investors has not met the terms of the smart contract, then the smart contract will recognize that the it this fact, and it will return whatever asset has been pledged to the smart contract by the other investor. So here's the rub. On international financial market principles, for example, CPMI IOSCO Principle 9, we should not be settling these large financial transactions in a multi-trillion-dollar treasury market with stablecoins, at least as currently envisioned, or with commercial bank deposits. Rather, under international principles, when the customer of a bank, in this case, in this diagram, customer 3 of bank 2 wants to make a wholesale financial market payment to customer 4 of bank 3, they're not going to settle that transaction in commercial bank money. They're going to have the banks make those payments in central bank money, as you can see in the schematic diagram. So the flow of funds is that customer 3 at bank 2 will ask the bank to use funds from its commercial bank deposit account or margin account over to bank 3 for credit to its customer 4. Let me repeat that. You can see from the flow of orange money, which is commercial bank money, and the flow of green money, which is central bank money, that the trade is ultimately settled via a transfer of commercial bank of central bank money. Without that, if this is happening on large financial market infrastructure, there's the threat of a sudden stop in financial markets when there's any doubt about the value of the underlying money that's being used for settling these large transactions. So under CPMI IOSCO principles, the ultimate settlement should depend on central bank money so that there's no doubt. It's not a question of whether the money is close in value to $1. You want the literal unit of account, the dollar that the central bank itself provides to the financial system to be used to settle these transactions. So here's how you would do this transaction again with central bank money. You would have the two clearing banks for the two investors, banks A and B, also participating on the programmable ledger. And at time T3, you can see that investor B is going to pledge funds to the smart contract. What it actually does is send a cryptographically signed message that allocates its cash in its commercial bank account to bank B and then allocates reserves, central bank money held by bank B to the smart contract. So now that the reserves shown in green on the smart contract are central bank money. And then at time T4, the central bank money is paid to bank A, which then credits its customer with cash in its commercial bank account. This is all feasible on a programmable platform like Canton. Just checking the time to make sure we're doing okay. So I think I've tried to make the message clear that for the tokenization of finance to proceed at scale to multi-trillion-dollar foreign exchange or bond markets, for the margining of multi-trillion-dollar derivatives markets, for securities lending, and for other wholesale financial market applications, where critical financial market infrastructure depends on the value of the underlying cash, there should be no question about that value. Instead, there should be complete trust in the unit of account that's used to make these payments, and that requires either central bank money or something very close to that. Don Wilson and I made a proposal for a super safe stablecoin that would reprice to $1 every day. Even that is not as good as central bank money, as I think Don and I are agreed on that. So someday, this is how it's going to happen. Currently, the European Central Bank is exploring uh, the tokenization of its central bank deposits. The Bank of Canada has conducted Project Samara. The ECB is working on Project Appia. The Bank of England has been working on this problem, although with a different approach. And other central banks are pursuing this. In my view, the Fed should also investigate whether this is possible for the United States. Now, let's turn back to foreign exchange before I complete. This is a diagram produced by Project Agora at the Bank for International Settlements. And this is a perfect application for a programmable ledger to process a cross-border payment, including the foreign exchange, the checking of the documents involving KYC, AML, countering the financing of terrorism, sanctions avoidance, and so on. And this chain of banks that are connected on this platform with the benefit of programmability of the money and record keeping uh, allows smart contracts to process cross-border payments far more efficiently than they are today. This is very well explained in the Project Agora white paper. This project has been done with a large number of international banks, global banks, and central banks. Uh, someday this will happen, but as I said, I don't think it's going to happen without a much sounder uh, form of money for the processing of large wholesale cross-border payments. And to do that, we're going to need central banks to tokenize their reserves or provide other means for access to their cash on programmable ledgers. One thing that's missing in Project Agora is how the market participants agree with each other on the terms, the fees, and the foreign exchange rates that are paid along the chain. And this is now a multi-agent contracting problem where if one of the banks agrees to its trade before the others have, then it may end up in a position it doesn't want and may have to reverse that trade. So what we ideally want is not only atomic settlement of the payments along the chain, but also atomic agreement to the initial terms of trade. And in some recent research with Professor Chaojun Wang at the University of Pennsylvania, we have shown that there exists a smart contract-based trade negotiation protocol that allows a programmable ledger uh, to be used to conduct not only the transfers and document checks, but also the negotiation of the trade in an efficient way. And I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk through the remaining slides, which you can access uh, later. But our results show that you will get efficient terms of trade immediately agreed and atomic agreement, then atomic settlement of the trade uh, if if you exploit the power of smart contracting, which means all or none agreement to all of the transactions before any market participant is committed. So, for example, if Dan Oury is trading with me and I'm worried about the terms that I'll get from Kelly Matheson, then the protocol would be that Dan will propose terms to me. I will propose terms to Kelly, but nobody is committed to the proposed terms. Each of us will click a green light, and the green light will commit us irrevocably if and only if everyone along the chain also clicks the green light, and then we're in. Otherwise, uh, there's no trade, and we can renegotiate. In equilibrium, it turns out we'll immediately negotiate on efficient terms. Long, I think I've given you my sense of what the tokenization of finance may look like and the fact that it can't proceed at scale until we have a form of cash settlement that meets international agreed standards for safety and financial stability. With that,
Got
I'm
it.
going to pass the baton back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Darrell. So let me quickly say what I have learned a bit. The first is that you point out that the promise of this is unlikely to really happen domestically unless until we have a killer app. And seems international wise is showing more progress. That's one point you pointed if I get it. Then you talk about most fundamentally there's this trust issue of the money thing, and so and as you point out in the end. But I have a question here. So uh, you see, I'm not sure you are suggesting that a central bank, the CBDC, the central bank issued currency, would that solve the problem? But we know in the United States, actually, this is banned. Uh, and other countries are like EU or probably China take a different approach. So, what is your take on this?
Okay, so first, yes, the United States has banned the development of a CBDC. I don't even use the letters C, B, D, and C because they're kind of toxic in the U.S. environment because of the politics of central bank digital currencies. I would talk rather about tokenized reserves, which are
Ah,
not available to the general public. And you'll notice that in the diagram in the schematic diagrams that I just presented, nobody but banks are touching the tokenized reserves. Only banks are permitted to hold those tokenized reserves. So it's not a CBDC. It doesn't threaten privacy of citizens.
got
Uh, the EU or the European Central Bank, for example, is pursuing both the retail CBDC, but only for small wallets without paying interest, not suitable for finance. And it's also pursuing wholesale tokenized reserves, which only banks could hold in principle, and which would, in principle, pay interest at the deposit rate offered by the central bank. So I think most central banks will eventually do this. The Fed might be one of the last because of the unique nature of U.S. politics and the Fed. But I think the U.S. Central Bank would also eventually issue tokenized reserves. There are other workarounds that I've talked to Kelly about on the side, and I want to pursue with her, but I'm not prepared to go far into that today.
So the final question, because you won't be here in the end. So, do you think we are close to a solution on the money, the trust issue you're talking about, or we're just trying different ways? You're talking about the challenge, but I'm not sure about the solution.
Right. The challenge is timing. So for now, tokenized finance is still small. I mean, in relative terms, it's a small fraction of the total, and it's not a question of financial stability yet. But this will become a bottleneck in the development of tokenized finance. It won't reach its full and natural potential for improving efficiency until this bottleneck is resolved by proper money for the financial system. The, so it's going to be, let's say, 5 to 10 years. And in the meantime, central banks are developing, the Fed is kind of behind, but central banks are developing methodologies for handling this problem. The Bank of England has an approach. The Bank of Canada has an approach. The European Central Bank has an approach. The Bank of Japan is making good progress. The People's Bank of China is making good progress, at least for foreign exchange. So I believe this problem will be resolved and probably won't hold up the development of tokenized finance too much because that's going to proceed quite slowly. There are network effects. Nobody wants to do this until most others are doing it.